Our Highline Voices, 106.5 KQWZ LP FM. Connecting Highline and our region. Share your story. Our Highline Voices, history, cultural heritage, art, performances, contemporary, pop culture. We are very motivated to provide a vibrant community museum and authentic social gathering place. It truly takes a village to raise a museum. Despite the challenges, our daily inspiration is our eagerness to build a stronger and more connected community. This museum is from the community to the community. Our passion is for our visitors to have access to a broad spectrum of information sources and cultural perspectives. Our Highline Voices.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today is a very special day, and I think I say that every single time. Every day is a special. I mean, it's a blessing and an opportunity to hear people talk and engage with them. And so today, we just have a presentation at the museum, and it was a powerful one for me, and I hope that for everyone that attended as well. So that's one of the things that we're going to be tapping in today. But for today, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to let Michelle introduce herself, and then we can go from there. Before that, thank you. Thank you for coming today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Liu, and I teach in the Department of English at the University of Washington. And I've lived in the Seattle area since 2000.
Tell us a little bit about the program that we hosted, but that you actually running. What is that about? What's the title, and who is representing the program too?
Yes, and so my presentation, I'm part of the Humanities Washington Speakers Bureau, and the Speakers Bureau is a collection of people who they define as, if you consider yourself having expertise or sharing some kind of knowledge or wanting to create discussion type of spaces for issues that are roughly circulating around the humanities. They invite people to join the Speakers Bureau for a time periods of 2 or 2.5 years, as in the case of myself. So this is my second time doing it. My first time was called The Country That Fiction Built, and it was about the 2 most popular books from the United States in the 19th and 20th centuries, and how it shaped how we relate to each other, especially cross difference. And this time, my talk that Nancy just invited me to give at the museum is called What Laughter Tells Us, Asian Americans, Comedy and Belonging. And the reason why I decided to do this project in the wake of the first Humanities Washington talk I did is my first Humanities Washington talk circulated a lot around the legacy of how people use stories to talk about slavery, and how those stories continue to structure how we emotionally and empathetically relate to each other. Because on one level, literature is often said the reason why we should read literature is to create empathy for each other. But one of the things that I wanted to take on in this presentation is that literature never is a straightforward empathy machine. It creates ways of connecting to people who have different experiences with us, at the same time that it can also create walls. It can create emotional patterns that can be very powerful for how we interconnect. But all stories have limitations and blind spots, because they're only from the creation of one particular mind. And so that presentation was an invitation to think about how we can see people's pain and what ways not. But I realized in the course of doing that one that it was a very somber presentation, and I think that limited the kind of venues that would invite me out to speak. And the whole reason I wanted to be on the Speakers Bureau is because I teach at the University of Washington. I've taught for over 20 years now, and we have such magical and deep conversations in the classroom. But I realized the university is not a place that everyone has a chance to go to or wants to go to. But at least in the English department, we're talking about issues that so many people care about. And so I really wanted to take the chance and experiment with what it would be like to have conversations with people outside of the classroom, in an unhierarchical way as possible. Because when I go into the classroom, I'm the teacher, I'm the professor. And of course, when I'm invited into different venues, I have some authority as a speaker, but I'm also primarily a guest to meet with the people who've come in together in that particular space and present with them some context to talk about issues that might be difficult or hard to talk about in our everyday life. And so I wanted to do this particular presentation on focusing on laughter because it came out of something that happened in the classroom like a very long time ago. We were talking about comedy, and one student just raised her hand to contribute to this conversation because it did circulate a lot about microaggressions and comedy. This is something that Nancy brought up in the Q&A in response to my presentations. And she's like, we're thinking too much about this. Laughter, you either laugh or you don't. Comedy's supposed to be entertainment. You're not supposed to think about it. We're just killing it right now. And on one hand, I knew exactly what she was talking about. But on the other hand, I said, but yet laughter does talk about such serious things. Like I think of laughter as happening so quickly where people aren't even thinking about it. So I wanted to talk about it more because the ways that we feel okay about laughing is so much related to the patterns of how we have been given cultural permission to interact with other people. So I said, how can I do a talk that invites whoever decides to show up for that particular day to have a conversation about the particular past that has informed when they have felt it is okay to laugh. Like people have been given different cultural permissions to do that. Mm-hmm. And I feel like when it's about laughter, people feel more ready to talk about these kinds of things. Because this is also tracking something that I have wondered a lot about in teaching. When I first started teaching, I would often lecture because that is the mode that I had been taught in. And I realized how much it was trying to beat people into a certain position. And it was not effective because it's not welcoming in the whole context for why people think the way that they think. And the more I was able to think about teaching as a way of just building discussion, I realized that we, including myself, have a much deeper learning about why it is and how it is we interact with each other and how we are better able to imagine how we can interact differently. So when I go to these different venues, I'm a guest, I'm a guest, and I have material that I hope will open up really good discussion, and it's so interesting to hear what different micro communities bring to it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people are a little upset that we're not talking about laughter as something that's straightforward. It's like you laugh because it's a good time, and to talk about the serious stakes of it, sometimes people don't necessarily react well to it. But I think on the most part, it's been really interesting for people to share the context for how laughter has worked in the various experiences in shaping their sense of self. And it's been really interesting to hear how many people have really used this space to talk about how marked and scarred or wounded they have felt by being laughed at. And to use that basis as a way to imagine what do we want differently from laughter as to laughing with, because that's often harder. It's harder won. Like we were in the audience today and we had precisely this question of like, can't I just have someone smile as a form of bridging closeness? And it was really interesting to have this conversation, with this particular community that came in for today's discussion to talk about. We have such good intentions. We have such positive intent. How can we create the groundwork for making that positive intent really felt deep within us? Because that's the same source from which laughter comes.
Yeah, today's conversation was an interesting one because we are addressing the human factor in many different ways, but I was impressed by your bravery on confronting such a delicate topic. Just laughing and the need to keep it simple, the need to just organically laugh because we all have a bad day and we just want to laugh without having to think about anything. But then are we adding to the situation when we are not consciously aware of what we're laughing at? Because we are not laughing with, we're laughing at it many times and are we conscious about that? And you asked that very specific question, and are you laughing at something, at somebody? Or are you laughing with somebody? And there's a really big distinction because to me is a disconnection that happens between you laughing at somebody. Culturally, and I think in every culture that happens where you use laugh as a way to release and cope with stress. For example, in Mexico is not, we are a third world country, and so survival is such a basic thing. And laughing, and oh my God, they laugh at every little thing and so outrageously with everything, and it just normalize. You normalize, everything, all the cultural elements, but when you bring that out of that cultural environment, and then you bring it from a different group or different demographics, and look at that, and then being used that as another source of building up that comedy, that to me that brings in a little bit of the ethical dilemmas. And how do you doing this, and how are we inviting people to participate in a bullying situation or participate in a microaggression, normalizing it, sanitizing it, versus are we really laughing and having fun, and are we really being conscious about that? And it's a tricky one because instinctually, me as a human being, I just want to laugh. I don't want to think about anything. Something's funny, I just want to laugh. But then where is the empathy? Where is the kindness? Where is the connection? Where is that sense of, hey, I see you, and it's not okay to laugh at you when you are, and like there are times that people laugh at you and that you just smile and laugh too, just because it's another way of defending yourself or protecting yourself. I think of like all those little kids at school, how many times people are laughing at each other. And we normalize it, and kids teach us laughing, but the moment nobody's watching them, you just come down and crying just because.
Right.
And so with as you continue your work of engaging with people and diving into this, to me, it's not that simple. It is a complex one because you tap in many different layers. You tap it into the cultural element while addressing those situations through laughing as a channel, as a bridge to invite those conversations to take place. So that's like one. The next one is when you tap it into examples, when you ask questions, and when you invite people to think deeper. And then are you receiving defensive? Are you receiving, like at one moment, I thought that one of the person in the audience was like, is he going to be too aggressive? Like and coming across with his frustration. And so my question to you is, how do you see this program evolving into deeper conversation as you continue to experience different feedback, or are you still with the foundation that you have? Why are you doing this? I know it's a kind of complicated question. You originally you had this concept, you propose it, you structure it, and you have a reason because there's a passion behind that. There's a reason behind that. But the question is, do you continue to experience more perspectives, more people? Is that changing, or it is still the same? The foundation is still the same.
Oh, yeah. Yes, there's so many interesting things. So I'll just bring up what I'm thinking of first in response to your question. The talk really has evolved. I'm near the end of the 2.5-year cycle for my contract with this Speakers Bureau, but it has changed a lot based off audience expectations. When you only have, you assume that the Humanities Washington asks that the presentation be about 45 to 50 minutes, and then leave time for some conversation, because sometimes it's a 60-minute hard cap. And that's not a long time to engage with people who you just met and most likely will not see again. It's a real challenge to think about how to create a context to have a deep conversation, or at least plant the seeds for people to think more about something on you as you exit. And so I have altered, changed things around, so I can try to get people to that more uncomfortable, sweet discomfort quicker. And as we're just coming off the presentation, but the last clip I end with, I want people to bring lots of perspectives to it. Like if I showed it first, I think it wouldn't work. Yeah, but by ending with it, I think it gives more space for people feel moved to bring up all the different ways this clip hits them. Like I just gave this talk a few days ago, and it was online, which does change dynamics, but it's harder to read the various perspectives coming in, but it seems like a lot of people participating. A lot of people were approaching it more for the sweetness of the story that of the clip, but for today's run, we were picking up more on the incredible risks she is taking in performing her mother's story in this way. And I think it's for this audience, for the people who showed up today, that was the conversation we needed to have, more about the risk rather than talking about the sweetness of the story. And it's so interesting to try to create a context where people can share different perspectives on it. Because I think that's the value of it, to show not just, oh yeah, we all laugh and we are all the same, because as you said, in the end, we all fundamentally have commonalities, but that doesn't mean it's easy to get there. It doesn't mean that if we're going to have this a commonality that feels deep, not just that we bleed the same color, for example, but if we want that commonality to be deeper, we got to reach more in all the ways and recognize the different cultural permissions we've been given to how we operate in the world. And it can be difficult to acknowledge the different cultural permissions that we have in the world. Like something that came up a lot today is the various triggers we each of us carry with us that can make it harder to interact with each other. So we always have the individual level, as well as layered on top of that, the different ways that we feel like we have been overly defined by how our bodies get perceived. And so I feel like if I succeed in this presentation is not from, because, I've shared my perspective, but I've created a context to have conversations that are otherwise harder to have in the everyday. So that's something that I think about. Yeah, the talk has changed over the 2.5 years based off what I'm noticing. And sometimes I feel like I've designed things so I can get to that uncomfortable part quicker. In ways that people enjoy, because uncomfortable often has very negative connotations. But I think if we could get to the moment of sweet discomfort, that's the moment when we can grow and stretch ourselves just where we are right now, without feeling wounded or overextended. I think that's for myself. I see that as creating a context for different changes that people can take with them outside. But it's a small part of the architecture of how we all grow and change based off what we see and based off the experiences we have.
Yeah, there's different things that you were tapping into that I don't think I'm overusing the term triggering, but it's just those triggers that's like, whoa, and maybe it's because I'm interacting with a lot of situations on an everyday basis, and then different programs that we do, and then what's the mission and the values of this as an institution. But the idea of doing it because you care, to do it as raw as you can and as authentic as you can, and then not to, like you said, not to make people uncomfortable, but hopefully invite people to open up and then truly start hearing each other. I've been engaging with several of the people that attended today, and I barely hear them saying things like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting. Okay.
Yeah. They just see me, they say hi, and we engage, but it has always been on, we don't pick on somebody's races or race just because. I'm always trying to make sure that the values are that we see each other, not necessarily those labels. And today's conversation was an interesting one for me on a personal level. When I'm able to hear other people that I interacted with every day.
Yeah.
And then on top of that is, there are many, and I'll be straightforward. I don't know how people will take it when I hear me say things like this, but like some people have claimed that I whitewash everything. Like
you whitewash everything?
Yeah. Because I am making it too gentle, I'm making it too sweet, and I'm making it too in a way that is not as aggressive. And my position when I hear that is like, I'm not here to attack or defend. I'm here to dialogue. I'm here to talk. And if it is through a hug, if it is through a meal, if it is representation, if it is through an exhibit, if it is teachers in a field trip, in many different ways, I'm going to try to bring those elements to talk to each other. I learned many times that when somebody comes in a defensive, protective, aggressive position, they are not ready to listen. They are not ready to talk. They are ready to defend. I don't want that. I don't need that. And so how do I make sure that we attempt to have those dialogues when you're having those authentic conversations, and not in a way that you are attacking or defending or in a wounded position, but like actually because you want to learn, you open. I mean, maybe you don't even have that concept clear in your brain that you want to learn, but it's more about like, I'm curious. I didn't know that. And then it just continue the conversation. And so the idea of laughter is a new concept for me to find it. For me here, what I'm trying to do is to do it through fun, to come up with fun projects. We do have a balance of social justice topics, controversial topics, history, and then having a really diverse community that in Highline. And so we have a really large percentage of low-income families. And so how do we address that? Historically, this is a new generation coming to the area when you have many generations already having pioneer families, and then obviously Native American communities. But it is, how do you, I see this crash of two different demographics, and they still don't know how to cope with it. When you think about LA, you think of New York, or you think of other big cities, they already have generations and trying to accommodate and adjust to the different changes, especially with immigration. This area, you don't see the immigration taking place, the volume and number of people coming all at once. And I'm not only talking about racially cultural immigration. I'm talking about social economic of you see the economy and the technology and companies are coming to the area are so dramatic. And so it's within one generation that you see all these changes from a small town feel to now a mega city without the adjustment that all the bigger cities have actually had to deal with. And so how do you deal with an area there is really rich traditionally families living in the area, but then you got this new generation that is brand new coming into the area, and then so there's all these different demographics that are playing a role in how do we have those dialogues. But I'm talking a lot already.
Oh no, this is I love this. I'm thinking of so many things, so keep on talking, please.
But the one thing that I love about your presentation is when you know that when you're trying to have these dialogues and then they've been closing the doors on your face because nobody's either comfortable or that's not the right time, it's not the right people, you don't create the space or the space organically doesn't come organically to actually have those dialogues. What I love about your presentation that through something that we all have in common, we all have the need to laugh, we can actually connect that way. I do say that we have more things in common than differences because we're humans, meaning that we feel hunger, we feel pain, we feel emotions, we feel, we all want a warm bed and have a meal and then being able to feel that we belong and to revalidate our emotions and to make sense of why are we here and have a sense of community. And so I do see this that across ages, across ethnicities in different elements, that we do have the same hunger in a way, and the same needs of why are we here and how do we actually feel like we are alive. And so from that human layer. That's what I see, that we got more things in common. Now, the more everyone is different, we all have different, our unique stamp is there. So nobody's like us. And so there's honoring the similarities and cherishing the differences. And it is a rich dynamic that we all feel. Going back to your presentation, to me was an interesting element of how something that you see frequently, you don't really have the time to stop and analyze it. Because before your presentation, I would think of comedy, and then I will be at times I'm listening to things like, "Oh my gosh, it is okay," but then everyone's laughing, and then everyone like, "It seems okay." So it's normal. It's just me over exaggerating. It's me overthinking. But your talk is inviting me to actually think a little bit more deeply. Are we? How are we? Are we a bully society?
Are we a what society?
Are we bullying each other?
Oh,
society?
I see.
Are we? I mean, so those are the thoughts that crossed my head. And before your presentation, I didn't think about that. And then when I was looking at some of the materials that you were saying, it like, well, that's a microaggression to me. That's how I translate that to that. And then, oh, well, this is racism and there's prejudice and all these different topics that, once again, we don't have the freedom to talk much about them. And so your presentation opened up a completely different perspective on how do we engage with different communities and how do we engage with tapping into those topics in a way that is, you mentioned before, uncomfortable, but it's more about uncomfortable. It's about, can we talk?
Yeah.
Can we talk in every relationship, even in any relationship? We at one point or another, we have to have those talks to somebody if we really want that relationship to flourish. It could be with your spouse, it could be with your parents, it could be with your friends. You had the moments that you do need to dive deeper to actually have those dialogues.
Right.
And I don't know, it's just, I mentioned already that you're brave because not everyone is ready. You might invite them and they might come here, but then when they hear something that they don't like about it, have you encountered many of those situations?
I'm happy to say, not to my face. I mean, we'll see you in the evaluations. But if I can roll back something, there's something really powerful that you said, like I don't know if people have said it to your face that you feel like they feel like you're whitewashing.
Yeah.
Oh, they said it to your face. Okay. Yeah. I want to talk about that because I feel like I think about this so much with my teaching too. Because the similarities between having a classroom or being a humanities Washington speaker, it's all about, or in a museum, is trying to create a space for the spark for something different to happen. And I know you were saying, oh, you feel like you're overusing the word trigger today, but that's because I feel like that's the main language we have to describe differences, trigger. And I something that my brain has been thinking about so much over these past few years is from Ocean Vuong's book, On Earth for Briefly Gorgeous. And he writes about, one of the things he says in there is why is the language of creative writing so militarized? Like he says, when a poetry reading goes well, it's like, oh, you killed it. You slayed it. And there's so much violence inherent in the words we use to describe what it means to create something, that moment of surprise or that moment of really trying to break out of the usual stories we tell and the usual cultural permissions we have. And I 100% agree that so much microaggressions are about triggering. And I also feel like what is a trigger can also be used with different language of creating like a growth point. And our language is not developed well enough to talk about difference in other than a wound. And I'm thinking a lot about my husband's story that I shared. Like he's Jewish, but he became best friends with a kid in Norway when he was studying there because the kid showed him a swastika and smiled. And that's definitely triggering. Definitely. And it also turned into something else. And I'm not saying that every trigger is a growth point. But I think when we are in the power of creating a space, like you at the museum, the classrooms are the very speaking spaces that I get to. We always have a chance to try to take a trigger point and turn it into a moment of connection. And because as you said, we have so many differences. There's so many communities go through fluxes and don't have a way of talking about difference, but people are laughing about it. Right. And laughing is often the preliminary way that we try to process the differences around us. And oftentimes it can be a laughing at. It's not a connective laughing with. And I'm thinking so much about how social justice movements don't want to just focus on trauma, don't want trauma porn. We want to talk about joy that comes from talking about difference. And I think part of that mechanism is definitely not ignoring the trauma or ignoring the various things that trigger us, but feeling empowered creatively to think about how we can turn not every single trigger, but if we can feel more mentally and emotionally stable, to think about we always have the power to collectively imagine how to not just see a wound as a wound, but as an opening into something else. And that's really difficult to do. And I think it's difficult to do because there's so much grief and frustration sometimes when people feel like we haven't talked enough about the pain, or especially when we're living with structural inequalities that continue to cause the pain and continue to cause the friction of difference. But we need people working on this problem from all different angles.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. It's like, if it just took a well-worded argument for someone telling us and diagnosing the problem, all these problems would have gone away already. But we need people working on so many different emotional registers to create spaces for us to come together. So we're not only feeling the language of war when we meet each other, trigger, wound, defense, these are all coming like from fighting terms, but just something else.
There's one key word that you use, joy, and what that is. I don't believe in happiness.
Mm-hmm.
That term, to me, is like a fairy tale concept.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe in collection of moments that are joyful. I do believe that when you collect in those moments and when you appreciate of those moments, that's what makes sense. Instead of that fairy tale, once you reach to that point and then you stay there and then.
Yes.
So that's, but one of the things that I like about this is, once again, is that, and I use the term whitewashing in how people have translated in a different way of talking about these issues without being so confrontational, without being so, like you were saying, all these different areas that, you have to like highlight it and stamp on it and keep pushing it. How much can you do it when it's already too many people doing it?
Yeah.
And so the idea of allowing us to have that conversation where we can address it, but from a different lenses, from a different emotion, from a different perspective, from a different voice, the different narrative. And I think that's what is the beauty of this type of dialogues, is allows us to change the narrative a little bit, to improve it or to transform it in a way that allows us to understand a little bit more. Maybe not, maybe it just allows us to be more curious and maybe just scratching our head like, what? And maybe a few more years later, we actually start connecting the dots, A, B, C, and D. But these conversations of how do we address these issues in a way that is safe. I mean, I can see this conversation being at the school and I'm talking about like elementary kids, like when they're really young. How can that conversation be taken if you test the same presentation to little kids? How would they interpret the questions that you're, and that I guarantee you, they will come up with a completely different set of issues, and it might be impactful for them to understand. Hey, wait a second, maybe I should not be laughing at this, or maybe there's more than this, and maybe their brains are so open, like you were saying. There was something that took in the dialogue that we had earlier. The kids' resilience, and maybe the kids that they don't mind so much about dealing with issues. They do. It's just that they don't know how to process. They don't know that it's happening. They don't know that they experience it, that they don't have a term one of the things that I used to describe is like, I'm blind and I'm in a dark room and I feel pain. I don't know from where or how. I just feel some type of pain. But because I'm blind and have this thing in my eyes, I cannot express it. I cannot define it. I cannot put a term to it. It's not later on in life that it will, oh, that's what that means. This word means that. Oh, now I see why it's this, and understanding pain. And the end of the day, we humans, every single day we're going to experience something. We're going to learn something, and that's something that for sure is going to happen. Is that no matter how old we live, no matter how educated we get, no matter how many people we talk to, in the end, it's only a little percentage of what is out there. But what it makes us, I think, grow and process is that we enriching ourselves. It's like feeding. It's like consuming meals, processing meals allows us to connect the dots later on as we continue in lifetime. But I am very curious as to how will you address, not that you will do it, but how will you, if given the opportunity, how will you address this conversation in Asia?
Oh, yes.
Another one, how will you address with kids? How will you address within a retirement home? How will you address it with different genders, like just women or just male, with the context of life and changes? And I guarantee you, yes, because like, for example, you were talking in your presentation, there was a lot of what you see about this and all the males being, being in one way, while the women, and the female gender has been a completely different perspective. And then, like in the space that we just shared, we're talking about not just ethnically different, but also age-wise different, and the experiences and how we articulate, how open we are to express things. But no, I really find it really, really interesting that your dialogue allowed me in a personal level, but I hope that everyone attended, to see and process and scratch their heads and and I bet you that, like, for me, I don't think I will see comedy the same way after this.
Oh, well, that's
No, in a good way, because it makes me see the fragility too. I see that sometimes that we see our human elements up to the surface and we don't even recognize it, how fragile we are and how painful they can be. And then we trying to laugh at that too, because it's a way to cope with it.
Right.
And so I don't know what you think about the idea of, like I say, it's not that you're going to do it, but how do you think your presentation would change depending on the demographics?
Oh, yeah. Well, maybe to answer that question, I'm going to pick up some of the rich language that you were invoking earlier. Like earlier in this conversation, you said we were talking about, the ways that we have commonalities. We all get hungry. And then just when you were talking about, talking out loud about the different ways that how food brings people together. I think being in spaces like the museum and, like in the classroom or et cetera, it offers opportunities to feed people so that we see each other, not just for the commonalities of our pain, but the ways that we can see each other eating and nurturing and trying to grow. And so, like, for example, when I have given this talk in retirement communities, it is so interesting to see the different ways that they want to be fed by the space that, this presentation gives them. A lot of them feel, and whenever you talk about demographic, I'm always hesitant to put like a broad gloss on it because, of course, they each have their individual variations within the demographic. But it's been so interesting. I think the commonality I've been noticing when I go to retirement communities is a lot of them feel such a sense of urgency of having lived very long lives and to have sensed these ways that we're hungry, but they want to get said that we must be able to use our experience to feed the world differently and to feed us, like in spiritual and emotional and cultural ways. And it's been really interesting to hear from them because so many of them have lived through different time periods of pain and come out and see the ways that every moment has its joys. And so to collectively create spaces where they can talk about the ways that they have lived the long, rich lives they have because they've have been very resilient in figuring out how to know we are hungry, but also we need to be, that we always have ways to feed each other. And I think that's been really, really fascinating. I haven't had an opportunity to give this talk to young kids. I know they would come up with different things that I can't even anticipate. I mean, kids, because they're just at different stages of their life and experiencing the different restrictions or pathways that life tells them they must follow based off the bodies they have. Of course, they feel things differently. And it's so interesting to see the different mixes, like when I go into rural areas versus city areas. Like in city areas, sometimes it's harder for people to move beyond the pain. And I've been finding that very interesting. I've been finding that, and it's sometimes, sometimes the more people have been steeped in knowing all the deep wrongs that have happened, sometimes it could be harder to widen out the menu of how we feel like we live ethically, to move to include, like, yes, there's been so much that is wrong, and what else can we do? What else has happened? Like, if I'm just going to share a story from I have a high schooler, and they were in their government class, and the teacher asked, okay, so what's one good thing that has happened that the United States has done? And the class could not come up with anything. Nothing. And my kid was, brought up some things, but they were really surprised. They're like, really? Can we think of nothing good? But I think sometimes the way certain demographics have felt the social justice movement is the only way that we can ethically navigate this, is to be aware and very somber about all the injustice we've had. And I do want people to be able to know that we are where we are as a country and as a world, because people have always had a relentless desire to create, to be more than just creatures of want and creatures of deprivation. Yeah. So,
yeah, there's one powerful lesson that I learned through an exhibit that we did. It was a Black Lives Matter, and it was right in the middle of COVID, right before the election.
Ooh, okay.
Yes,
things were hot.
It was, and so I was working with a University of Washington English group of five students, and then I have a high school group working with me to develop this. They were helping me with different things, but it was in total of 12 cases around downtown Burien, because we were not allowed to bring anyone inside the space. And so we put it on the front stores around. And obviously, right, it was right before the attacks of the Capitol building.
Okay.
On the day, I'm meeting with my two groups. And the first one is with my high school kids. And this is a Black students club that I was working with directly. And when I was with them, I was like, do you know what's going on? I'm getting all these texts. There's a teacher asking. Like, yeah, the Capitol building is getting attacked right now. And she's like, no. And then I saw all the kids just nod, just very quiet. And one of them was like, you want us to participate in this exhibit when there's no respect for the building? And so that was the fear. The fear was there, and it was powerful.
Yeah.
It was powerful to see how the kids reacted when I shared that, while I'm asking to contribute to this exhibit. And then later on in the afternoon, I was with my UW students. Let's do this, let's do that. They were on the opposite. The kids were scared and afraid, and even, did I have permission to say something? As for my students in the UW, they were more in attacking mode. Let's push back. And on two groups, I said, no, wait a second. This is not about them and us, not us and them. This is about the different factors in the contributions in American history. And it is about historically what is important. So how do we influence each other? And so, this is not, you don't guys have permission to be in a position right now. This is about how do we celebrate American history. How do we share the contributions? How do we share the highlight, the good things about things? This is not about relieving the pain, which the pain is there, but it's not about showing it all the time. It's about reflecting and how do we move forward. And so at the same time, I also had the African American Rights Alliance to take ownership of 2 or 3 cases. And one of the projects they were working on is doing these recordings, these poetry recordings for us to display on the exhibit with QR codes so people can have access to it. And then also just to record it. And I was afraid because I asked that before the whole, everything was really exploding at that time.
Yeah, right.
And so, and as my promise to everyone is like, I'm not controlling your narrative. I don't want to tell your story. You are the driver of your own story. I don't want to do what traditionally museums do. And when I give you that space of you taking control over that, I say that, but when everything was happening, I was like, I have insomnia. I was sweating in my hands. How am I going to do that? I give a promise that I will be, fair and everyone will share the story respectfully. That's the only thing I'm asking is just to do it respectfully and mindful. But like, how would I go to the group and like, I want to see what you're producing. I want to censor this if there's no okay. Right. And I just close my eyes and like, I'm just going to let it go. I'm just going to trust and see what happens. And so when they sent me the link of their recordings, I was shaking. And it took me probably like an hour to open the link because like, I don't know. How am I going to say no to a group that they are invested in this?
Right.
And right when all the emotions are in the surface. Mm-hmm. I opened that up. I opened the link, which you can see it is on our YouTube channel, by the way. Okay. I opened the link and I don't know if it was 12 artists or 25 artists. I forgot the number. It was a big number of people that contributed to this recording. And each person that spoke was with a background music of cheerful. It was of inspirational. It was about resiliency. It was about raising above that. And then finding the character and the courage and the fears and the spirit of how do we do it in a way that is nurturing, is passing on to a message that is not about the pain narrative, which, like I said, the pain is always there and we should always respect it, but it's about how do we move on from that narrative and then be part of a solution. And so the whole was very inspirational. It was very humbling to see that despite of the pain and the justice and the issues and the turmoil and the adrenaline and the fear and all the emotions all at once, they were able to produce something that you see them with a beautiful music and the background music just playing and just trying to share those good healing, soothing vibes and supportive vibes to everyone who's listening to it while being strong enough to say, and there's some powerful words in that one. And so from that experience, I learned that that we do need to be open to how we address a situation, especially pain, whatever form and shape, historically, social justice, currently, in the future. But there are ways. It doesn't have to be the confrontational way. It doesn't have to be the aggressive way. It doesn't have to be, your spirit, your character comes from different ways. And I think that showing it through laughter, showing it through kindness, compassion, and being empathetic towards each other and actually say, can we have a talk? I'm not here just waving your white flag and like, I'm not here in a position. Can we talk? So that's what I'm taking out of the presentation that we had with you today is that the opportunities to create more bridges in different ways for different people. So thank you. Our time is almost up. Do you like to say anything last minute comment, Todd?
That was beautiful. I want to see this on YouTube, so I will have to get the link from you after we're off. Oh, that was just such a beautiful story. I'll carry with myself.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other last minute? Would you like to invite people to so you said that this program you're already up to 2 years and a half?
Yeah. So I'm finished at the end of December.
Okay.
So my contract is up with them, yes.
And so you only got
Couple
basically
more months.
and that
Yeah.
does it.
Yeah.
But
So I'd be happy to do it anywhere else. Yeah.
thank you so much again for coming to the museum to give that presentation. But more than anything, thank you for doing it for anyone who is willing and wanted to listen and to learn and to share and to inspire. Because like you said, it sparks and inspiration and itchiness. Like, I mean, what I mean is just like,
Yes.
are you curious? What was that about? So thank you for being brave.
Yeah.
And tap it into different topics that are really delicate, but in a way that is graceful and powerful. So,
Well, thank you so much, Nancy. I feel so honored to be part of your museum's vision, because this is such a special opportunity to come into this particular space. So thank you.
No, thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. And I hope that you can, hopefully, something is sparking inside of you.
Exactly.
Hopefully something allow you to be curious about the topics that we were discussing. So once again, thank you, and we'll get connected with you soon. Bye.
Our Highline Voices, 106.5 KQWZ LP FM.
We envision ourselves sitting at a round table where no one is the leader and stories are heard respectfully, regardless of gender, age, sexual orientation, disabilities, or ethnicity. We want to embrace our differences and similarities. We are creating a place where visitors can connect with the stories and each other. Our mission is, we collect, preserve, and tell the stories of the Highline region and its people. We want to extend our mission outside the walls of the museum. Our Highline Voices represents us all, honoring our past, celebrating our present, and uniting to cultivate our future. This project allows us to reach out to demographics who might be unable to visit the museum. People with disabilities, low-income families, people who don't trust museums, and more. In partnership, we are launching a locally programmed new radio station at the museum, featuring recorded and live Highline's heritage, history, culture, arts, and more. Are you interested in sharing your story? Email director@highlinemuseum.org.